All right, everybody. Today, I am excited to have Gillian Hill on the show today. She is a copywriter extraordinaire. After my interview with Paige McLeod, where we were talking about texting in your business, she shared with me that she's been working with Jill and couldn't say enough about her. Jill has experience working with photographers, creating website copy, brand voicing, and messaging guides. And I don't even know what some of that stuff is yet, but we're going to learn about that today. Jill has been working with Paige to create a package of workflows for photographers to communicate with their clients and is launching that soon. So I'm excited to hear about that as well. As soon as Paige started telling me about Jill, I knew I had to get her on the show because this is one thing that I know photographers struggle with. I see it on your websites, people. And that copy and stuff with your voice is so important. So I'm glad to have Jill here with us today and giving us some advice and giving us some insight to this. Jill, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
So let's start talking like a little bit about you. I know you are connected to Paige, but like tell us a little bit of your background. I know you right before we started the podcast, you're from Scotland and you're in the United
Yes.
States, but tell me a little bit about your background and what got you into copywriting.
Yeah, well, I think maybe the younger kids now in their like early 20s might be going into copywriting sort of out of school as a field. But most copywriters you speak to who are a little older, they didn't start that way. And so lots of us have really fun and interesting winding roads to get there. So as you said, I'm from Scotland. I was actually an attorney in Scotland. So I did a lot of contracts, which is incredibly detailed and dry and boring. But at the end of the day, it's communicating what you want your client to say clearly enough that a court of law can uphold it. And then we moved to the States. My husband is also Scottish. So we moved for his job in 2009. We kind of like moved around, got visas, had babies, moved to different states. So when I was finally ready to start working again, I didn't want to sit at the bar. I didn't want to do the long hours. He already works long hours. And so basically I had been writing some fiction myself with friends and really enjoyed editing, which that attention to detail of the words is really similar to what I did as a lawyer. So I started editing for friends, and then friends of friends paid me, and I kind of got into editing, sort of fell into that. And then I discovered, I didn't even know copywriting was a thing at this point, to be honest, but authors often needed help. They're really good at writing 100,000 words of a book, but trying to write the back cover, 2 paragraphs that tells you what it is,
you would think
do
I'm a
that.
writer, that would be the easy part, right?
It's so hard to summarize this precious baby. They've been working for it for like 6 years. You're like, can you tell us 2 paragraphs about it? They cannot do that. Or also sometimes writing their website. They needed to advertise themselves as an author. They needed to talk about their book in a way that sold it to people. And that's when I discovered what copywriting was. And that's when I was like, oh, this is what I like to do. And so I fell in love with copywriting and learned all the things I could learn about it. I still sometimes edit for fiction authors, but I now actually also really edit for copywriters, because the way copy looks on the page, if you ever looked in detail or thought about it yourself as you're writing your homepage or your about page, we break all the grammar rules, we break punctuation rules. How we lay the words out on the page is sometimes just as important as what you say, because there's got to be sort of like white space in different places. We bold words and italicize words in different places for different meanings. And crucially, the words you use that say the same thing as someone else, how you say them and sound like yourself is different to how the way somebody else would say the same thing. So I just really love the detail of the right words to use for the right person to communicate what they're trying to say, which is how I got into brand voice, which is a specialized area within copywriting, really understanding which words you use. There's so many variants of the verb to be, for example, like what do you pick when you're describing what you do? Are you snapping pics, or are you composing images, or are you creating art? You know, you could be doing any of these things as a photographer. So yeah, I got into copywriting, and because I specialize in brand voice, I edit for all different kind of clients. So I have worked with some photographers, and I've worked with Paige quite a lot within her business. And now we're starting this new business for photographers. But I work with all different kind of service providers, coaches, course creators, more on the service side than products, but just anybody who wants to explain in better terms who they are and what they're trying to do.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, copywriting is such an art that I think sometimes uh I am guilty of this, and I'm sure a lot of other people are guilty of this. They think, oh, I'll just do the cheap way out and I'll use Chat GPT, or I'll like, I will, just look at some other people's websites and get little ideas and then kind of combine it together and put it to my website and all that stuff. And then it just becomes a hodgepodge of crap. you
Yeah,
know,
well, there's
um,
definitely. I mean, I see that, and I understand. I mean, honestly, I did that at the beginning too. I understand why people do that. But if you think about it as a photographer, like in the olden days, pre-digital age, you'd have like one butcher and one baker and one photographer in your village, and you'd say, "This is what I want." They'd hang out their shingle, and it would just say what they did, and you got it. But if you're a photographer in your city, even if you specialize, say, into family or wedding or whatever, there's still dozens and dozens of people. If you think about it from your audience's point of view, they will go to the Google search and it's just going to come up with, pages of results of photographers that do what you do. And I don't mean people's images a disservice at all, because I think you all probably have very creative and unique ways of doing your photos. But for the audience looking, a lot of those images will look good to them. There'll be some people, they say, I don't like the way that person's images look, but they're still probably left with like 10 or 15 choices at that point. I like all these people's images. So how do they pick? You can go on price, but if you just go on price, it's a race to the bottom and the cheapest, and like nobody wins out of that game. But you can differentiate who you are by how you work, by what kinds of people you like to work with, by what's your like zone of genius. How do you make them feel on the photo shoot? What's the client experience that they're going to get? And if you can show some of that on your website, then that's more likely somebody that they're going to pick.
so tell me, why would, like, I mean, I feel like the answer is obvious, but why would somebody want to hire a copywriter as opposed to just doing it themselves and figuring it out themselves?
So I often say, to be honest, sometimes I talk to people who are at a very early stage of their business, and I suggest that they don't hire a copywriter, because I do think that when you're at the early stage of your business, you don't always have the money to spend on it, because it's, to hire someone to write your whole website will be generally thousands of dollars. But if you have been in business for a little while and you've sort of settled on the niche, like who you want to take photographs of, what area you're in, sometimes it helps to understand a little bit more about your selling style, like are you IPS or digital or whatever. Once you've kind of got those things more stable, because if you think about it, your website is a static place. Like generally we don't update the copy on there too often. Your blog pages might be updated, but your home and about pages won't be updated that often. So you need your business to be in a relatively stable place, I would argue, before you hire someone and to spend a lot of money to think about this. It's really good if you're at the stage of leveling up. So if you're doing pretty well in your business, but you're looking to maybe have to gain a different type of client who's willing to spend more money. Maybe if you're shifting on your selling process, for example, or you're putting more into your process and thinking about what the client experience is, all the way from them first finding out about you to getting the images, that might be the place where you're leveling everything up in your business. Then hiring a copywriter to help you uncover. So one of the things I think you mentioned at the beginning, as well as doing website copy, I also do what's called brand messaging. And people hire for that for a different reason than website copy. So I sometimes will do both, and I'll create brand messaging and then write the website copy from it. Some people will hire me just to do their brand messaging, and then they will write their own website, or they'll hire a cheaper copywriter to do their website. And I don't mind that. I'm usually quite honest about that. Hire someone to help you with the strategy, and then you can hire a lower rate person to help you implement the strategy. So brand messaging really helps pull out, like, what are the threads of the things you're trying to say? And you use that in your business, on your website, yes, but also in your social media that you're updating every day. You use it on sales calls when you're talking to clients and you get them on the phone. So if you have a strong concentrated sense of the 2 or 3 main messages you want to get across, that will come over so much more clearly on your sales calls, and I would argue changes that conversion rate as you get people on the call. And hopefully the people that come on a call are better fit, because your website's using the messaging, your social media is using the messaging, your clients who love you and are referring you are using the same messaging. the first time I really knew brand messaging worked was after I had really tidied up my own. And I got on a discovery call with someone and they said my message to me. They said, well, what I really want is, and then they described what it is that I do that I had like in my messaging.
Okay.
And it's like, oh, I don't even need to sell to them.
Right. You already
selling
themselves.
themselves.
So if I was a photographer and I wanted to get started in doing something, what I like, this is really interesting to me because like, I think we as photographers, I think we as a general public think, oh, my website's the first place that people go and see and blah, blah, blah. I mean, the truth of the matter is, and I tell people this, when I first started my studio, I was advertising myself on social media as a black and white family photographer. But if you went to my website, I had no black and white family photography because I'd been doing senior on location photography, specifically with athletes and stuff. So if you went to my website, that's all it was on my website. I didn't have black and white families because I didn't have that, you know? And so when I was starting, I was going out and getting people and eventually built that up. But, you know, so I always tell people, reason why I say that is I always tell people like your website's only a small tool in the whole thing. And it's just like, it doesn't matter what's on your website. Cause I think people, especially us creatives, get in the trap of like, well, they've got to see my pretty website and the pretty pictures and the words and all that stuff to really resonate with me. And I think there's some truth to that to a certain degree, but now you're making me question, like, as we're talking, because it's just like, is brand messaging something that I want to start with and then worry about website copy, or go backwards and do website copy and then do brand messaging?
I mean, honestly, I would tell you that you want to do it all, but you're probably not surprised to hear that from a copywriter.
No, I get it. I mean, from the standpoint of like what you do as a business, I know you want to take a holistic approach and everything, but like if I'm a photographer, I'm getting started, I'm trying to define what that voice is, and I'm finally in that place. And yes, I'm making money, but I don't have enough money to spend thousands of dollars. Where would my best bang for my buck if I was to hire somebody like you to build that voice wherever it is? Is it my brand messaging and that guide that you're talking about, or is it like building my website? It sounds like from what you just said a bit ago that it's the brand messaging that's the key, because it can go across different platforms. But talk me through that.
Yeah, so I think it depends. I would always say brand messaging first if you can. And in an ideal world, I would do someone's brand messaging and then write their website copy. But then we're at over $5,000 probably. So I know that there's lots of people who are not in a position in their business to spend that money on it. I actually have like a worksheet that I will give you a link to that people can sign up for, that helps you work through basically the questions that I would ask you or any other brand messaging strategist would ask you. Now, I would say there's definitely a benefit in hiring someone to help you because you're usually too close to it to be able to pull out the answers to these questions. But if you haven't thought about it at all, this will give you a really good running start. It's things like, what's your vision for your business? What's your mission in terms of like, how do you want to help people? You want to take photos, but for what reason, to make them feel what way? Like looking at what your competitors say and saying, do I feel that way as well? Or like, oh no, I don't do it the way they do it. So kind of analyzing what else is out there in the market to differentiate yourself from everybody else. But I would say that the other thing that makes a difference on if you only had like an ability to pay for one project, I often talk about that funnel, the whole funnel of how someone comes into your business, which you're right is way more than just your website. And sometimes I don't always like to think of a funnel as down the way, because it makes me often think of kind of that very bro marketing, like push everyone into the funnel and they're going to get squeezed out of the bottom. I like to think of it more like a pathway where people can join your path at various points and they can also walk off if they're like, ooh, this is not the walk for me. I'm here in my flip-flops and you're going on a 5-mile hike up this mountain. I'm going to move on now and find someone who's taking a walk on the beach. So there's like paths in and out. But if you're really focusing on, say, selling through to cold traffic, so through Facebook ads to an audience that doesn't really know you yet, then I would argue that they will often go to look at your website as proof of your authority. Are you who you say that you are? Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, I would definitely suggest that you hire a copywriter to help maybe with your Facebook ads and with your website. If you're trying to do the thing which Paige and I really like, which is to get the lowest hanging fruit of the business that you're in, which is how can you make the business you have make more money? So that's really focusing on the client experience so that your clients, if you sell IPS, spend more money, you're getting a better return per client. They're more likely to come back to you for repeat business because they love what you do, and they're more likely to be raving fans who recommend you. So then that traffic that's coming to you is warm because it's either someone you've already worked with or someone who's talked about the way you work. Because let's face it, when someone said you should hire my photographer, they were great, they're probably going to tell them loads of things about why you're great that have got nothing to do with your images. Like, I think it's a given you got good images from them, but what they will say is, they were so calm and took control at the photo shoot, or they were absolutely great at us just like being ourselves and they really captured who we were. You know, they're going to say something like that, and that is going to be your messaging. Honestly, that's what you want to be telling people. So if you're looking to sell more in that warm traffic way, then it might be better to work on your brand messaging to make sure that all the different places that someone's connecting with you, and then when you get on the phone to talk to them, and if your messaging already says these things, that is what your raving fans will say. Someone will say, you should hire my photographer because, and then they'll use that language that you're already using.
Well, and it's refreshing to hear like the honesty in that regards, and it's just like I think everybody's initial thing is like, fix my website.
Yeah.
But what I hear you say is, yes, you want to, like, ideally you want to do everything. You want to have the whole package, right? But it's so true. And I think we find this and stuff. I have my studio manager does all of our like social media stuff and everything. And she's learning as she goes, and I'm learning as I go. I'm like, I don't know, just put a bunch of pictures up there and just say some pretty words or something. But like, if you have a brand messaging and you have that guy that you're talking about or whatever, now it's like, now we can be more intentional about like what we're saying and using those same words. So like what you said with that client that called you, they're using the words that we've been triggering over and over again within our ads, within our postings, within our website. And it's just like when it's the win when they get on the phone with you and they say the words to you and you don't have to say it to them.
But it also means that they've already like if you think about a sales call, the client is doing it to check that you are who you say you are, and you're doing it to check they're a good fit person for you too. Honestly, we're both sides of us are checking.
It's an interview.
Yeah, right. It absolutely is. So they've self-selected into the way you sell if you have told them, or the way that you photograph, the way that the experience works for, with your business. You've maybe given some hints about pricing, or you've been quite specific about pricing. If they tell you those things back on the call, you already know, like, your work has been done too, and their work has been done, because they're like, this is the kind of photographer. You're more likely to have a good fit and a good experience with that client, because they already know what type of, like, you've promised them something in your social media, and then you're going to follow through with the promise. So the other thing, just real quickly, when it comes to a messaging guide, I would say that that's more important if you have a team, because if someone else is writing your social media copy, if you have a studio manager who your clients meet or maybe does sales calls or discovery calls, if you have, like Paige, for example, I helped her create a voice guide, and she uses it because somebody else writes blogs for her sometimes. And she wants to make sure she's very much like a realist. And although she's a newborn photographer, she kind of celebrates the messy part of life that you're in right now. And she doesn't sugarcoat where you are as a mom with a newborn. And if someone wrote her a very saccharine, isn't life precious, the most amazing thing ever with your newborn, it wouldn't sound like her, and it would
life is rough. You are up at 4 a.m.
Right. Never get and then she also says, like, let's take the pictures to celebrate that, so you can remember.
Right. No, I get it. I get it. Yeah, but it's like what you're saying. It's just like, Paige is getting on the phone and talking to somebody one way, and then the studio manager, the person booking a call or somebody, is getting on a phone talking to him a completely different way, and it doesn't totally mesh.
Doesn't gel.
Now, I mean, I get it. Like, personalities are personalities, and like, I can't change the personality of my studio manager, so to speak, but I can focus the brand messaging, so to speak, to fit her voice, but like be
Yeah, and
within
you can
our
ask her to
context.
talk. And that's honestly the difference between messaging and voice, because messaging is kind of like what you're saying, and then voice is how you say it.
Got it.
So it's all right to have some variability
So
in
her
your
voice
tone.
could be her voice and my voice
Yes.
could be my voice,
But
but the
she's giving
messaging
the
is the same.
same messages, right?
Got
And
it.
if we say, like, my main focus is to help people understand that I want to collect those moments for them to look back on later, that this is about you as the mum as much as the baby, then if your studio manager is also saying that, the promise you've made from the beginning doesn't get broken. Like I think a lot of a sales call is someone saying, are you really who you said you were? Especially in this digital world where it could be anybody. You might never have met them. You might not have any
Well, and you
direct.
get a lot of skeptics too when they see, like, for us, we get a lot of people off of Facebook ads and stuff. They're like, is this for real?
Yeah.
Is this a scam? Is this a, and it's just like, no, we're a real thing. Like one of the great advices I got is somebody just recently told me, like when we're texting, and Paige and I talked about this in our podcast, is when you're texting somebody and somebody asks like where you're from or like where you're located or something, they said share your location, but then in that use the URL link for Google My Business for your business, because it not only tells them the location, but when they click that link, now they see your reviews, they see pictures and posts that you're doing, they see your actual location, they see that you're legit. Because some people, like, I mean, we live in a very skeptical world. I feel like even more so now than we do in the past, because I mean, you hear about it all the time, people getting scammed. I mean, I get like UPS things now. It's just like your package is en route. I'm like, I
Yes.
haven't even ordered a
Yeah.
package, but
And
it's
if
trying
you
to
think
click a
about,
link so that it's going to scam
right.
me somehow.
And now, like, I heard about someone, like somebody who got lost and they joined their search party because they weren't answering the phone calls they did because they didn't know the phone number, so they didn't want to answer. And they were actually in the back of their own search party. They didn't realize they were
Yeah,
searching
but so I mean,
themselves.
people do search, but like that voicing and everything is really important and all that stuff. But
Yeah,
I mean,
because I think we've that promise has been broken by bad marketing in the past. So
right.
if your messaging and your voice is a promise that I am this person, if you were to meet me in the street or
Yeah.
speak to me on the phone, I'm the same person you heard on the social media, and the same person on the phone, and the same person in the emails you get that are setting up our appointment for the photo shoot, and the same person who's going to sell you the images at the end. Like you're going to get this consistent experience. And that scam is when somebody has broken that for us in the
Right,
past.
right, right, right. So, talk to me. I know a big thing that I've had, because I'll be honest, I worked with a copywriter a while back that helped me with my website stuff, but they didn't talk about brand voicing and stuff like that. They sent me like this worksheet of things that I should answer and do before they could do their part and all that stuff. And I found that very difficult to do a lot of those things, because I was like, I don't know. That's why I'm hiring you. You're
Yeah.
supposed to tell me what that's supposed to be. You know what I'm saying?
And
So
also why? Like, why are you asking me these questions? What are you trying to
yeah,
get to?
like, so it's hard. I think it's hard sometimes for some of us to talk about ourselves in a way. And a lot of what I found when I did that process was trying to talk about myself. And I'm like, I don't know what to say about myself. It's just like, I got a photography business. I want to shoot families and dogs, and I want them to have a great experience. Like, what else do you want me to say? So kind of walk me through like what that process would look like with somebody like yourself, so that like I don't feel, as a photographer or anybody that's doing web copy or brand messaging or something, that I'm just being thrown a bunch of homework and then I
Yeah.
have to come up with that. And like I feel like I'm doing the work for you. You're just going to
Yes.
clean it up for me at the end of the day.
And honestly, a lot of what I put on website copy quite frequently will be things that you actually said, and I just copy them down. But for me, the difference is I help you find that answer by doing interview, like we talk like this, and I take a transcript of it. And I think that my job is to pull the answers out from you, because you're right, you're too close to see it. I would argue that this is the difference in price between a cheap copywriter and an expensive one. And I think this is important to understand because we all have limited amounts of money to spend on all the different parts of our business, right? And we can't all hire the most expensive copywriter. And I'm definitely not saying that you need to. But this is the difference. Like a lower end price range copywriter is probably just starting, and they just say, I need this information from you, and then I will make it sound a little prettier and I'll put it on a website polished up. And copywriters who are like further along and understand a little bit more will do a lot more digging and research and take some of that responsibility on themselves, which means you have to pay them to spend the time to do it. So I will spend, maybe 3 times or 4 times as long as a beginner copywriter writing website and brand messaging. And so you pay for that as a result.
So when I'm doing that with you though, am I doing that like you and I are having a Zoom call right now?
We will do like 2 or 3 hours like this where we talk.
Okay.
Maybe just 2, usually just 2, we can get most of it out.
That's cool. Like it's just good. It's refreshing to hear in that regards, because it's just like you said, if somebody were to sit down and talk to me, as I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this, and you were to ask me questions, I could answer the questions. It's just, but sometimes I need the pulling out of the questions. If you just wrote it down, and I used to be in education, I used to be a teacher. So there's different kind of learning styles, and there's all these, like there's auditory and there's visual and there's, tactile and all that kind of stuff. And so when somebody hands me a piece of paper and says, answer these questions, it doesn't fit my learning style. I'm more of a person that like, I need to sit in front of Jill and Jill asks me the question. And then I'm like, I don't know. And then you go, well, tell me a little bit about this, or tell me a little bit about that. And then now you're like, you're playing psychologist, so to speak.
I mean,
pulling it out of me.
It's a lot of like digging. It's not just the first question. And then it's following, like, I love the rabbit holes because I'll be like, ooh, we started here. Like sometimes we don't get to the point till 45 minutes into a call, but then it's gold. You're like, here's the thing you weren't really telling me, and that you didn't even really know until we like pulled all the layers back. And honestly, like if
sorry, I'm just visualizing in my head right now, like I have to be laying on a couch and you're sitting there with a notepad like a psychologist. Like, so
it's not that bad.
Time in your life when you really wanted to get photography for yourself.
You can have a coffee at the same time. It's all good. But honestly, like this is why I don't like giving people a worksheet, because if you could translate your thoughts into words on a page, you would have written your own website. Right. No, but honestly, like the whole point is that a lot of people have a really hard time translating what they're thinking of. A, what are they thinking? And then B, how do I get those thoughts onto a written page? That's why you hire someone to do that job for you, is to do that transfer from your mind to the page. And also use some copywriting techniques, which are sometimes kind of psychological techniques. Sometimes it's getting very in to make sure it sounds like you. So that will be, we talk for 45 minutes, and out of that I pull out 3 paragraphs. Like we're not putting everything, we're not doing the entire word vomit onto the page. I just pull out all those key messages that you provide. And then also, honestly, I do what's also called voice of customer research, which is usually where I interview some of your customers and listen in their words to how it felt to have you as their photographer and what the experience was like. And sometimes we use some of that language as well.
So talk to me a little about that. Is it hard to find clients that like a photographer? How would a photographer go to a client and say, hey, I'm working on my voice, and I've got this person I'm working with, like how would I address that with a client and get them to do that with you? You know what I'm saying?
So usually what you find is that people are quite flattered, especially if you would pick the people that had good experience.
Right. You're not going to pick like, hey, I bought the cheapest thing. And it's just like, hey, why don't you come and do this?
Sometimes you can offer them like a discount if they come back, or an extra if they were just in recently, and we try and use recent clients. You might say, I'll give you an extra print or an extra digital file or something if you wouldn't mind doing this. But usually I either say it's because I'm wanting to write the website, or I'm helping them really understand their clients. And what I usually say is to make sure that you are giving your clients their best experience. We want to learn what they think about this is they love this. They're like, wow, John really wants to improve the experience for his clients. Like that only makes them feel better about you as a photographer. And we're like, we value you. How did you find the experience? Would you take 30 minutes to talk to my copywriter? And I draft all this up as an email that you send them, so you don't have to write that part. And then I usually try and interview, 2 or 3 more if we can. It depends on the size of the business. And I'll also just absolutely scour through like your Google reviews. I'll go and look at Reddits that are generally about photographers. I'll find out what people are saying in Facebook groups about photographers in your area. So it won't always be exactly your customers. Sometimes it will be general people who are looking for photographers like you, and I'll go and find that kind of data on the internet.
That's cool. Yeah, it's really fascinating. So talk to me a little bit about this. You talk about what you had texted me yesterday, and you said voice guide and messaging guide. What's the difference between a voice guide and a messaging guide?
So the message is really what you want to say. So for example, what I see a lot of photographers say is, we want to capture the real moments, like we don't want it to be stiff and formal. We're trying to capture the real everyday moments of you and your family. But voice is how you say that. So each different person will say that in a slightly different way. And honestly, it translates to your brand personality. Now, if you're a photographer on your own, your brand personality and your actual personality are a Venn diagram that's almost a circle, like you're basically the same. There are some things about your personality that you might not bring to work, in which case maybe we take those out of the brand personality circle. But a lot of it is how you describe, how you personally would describe that message, because at the end of the day, photographers are saying a lot of the same things. So like I had a little look at some Boise photography websites before we came on, and one of them said, like, I help rad and something couples like live their best, like document their best life or something like that. And then there was another one that said, this is all about you. And then there was another one that talked about letting people be in it. They didn't use the word silly. They had a really interesting word that they used, goofiness. It said, let's celebrate your goofiness. So like those are all sort of saying the same thing, but they're really saying them in different ways. And if you use ChatGPT, which I love ChatGPT for some things, but please don't use it to write your website. If you use ChatGPT, all it does is takes an amalgamation of what it sees everywhere and it merges to the middle. And it will just sound like generic website copy. Like if we didn't see your images or your name and we read it, would we know that it was about you?
Right.
Or would we think it was about any photographer in your area? And like each sentence is not going to be that precise, but over the course of the whole website, we want enough of those little hints where someone's like, oh yeah, that's John Glazier, who's, his site, because it sounds like him. And that's what we want, is like, don't do the formal stuffy BS or business speak, as I like to say, but like, can we take out the high school English teacher filter, and can we take out the professional filter and like just find who you are? So if you're a really sweary person, like swearing might be part of your brand voice. There's lots of brands who include that. If you are really a gushing person who just talks about the beauty and the love all the time, and that's actually how you sound, then use that when you're talking about it in your website copy.
So how are you balancing, like, so I'm kind of a goofy nut job kind of guy when you know me. Like, I mean, it just, and I'm, some people would describe me as foul mouth at points, and everything. And so I'm like, I feel like I put on a little bit of a different persona in front of clients,
Yes.
like more of a professional type of thing versus the goofy person that people see on a day-to-day basis. How should somebody balance that with their brain? Because like that's hard for me, to be honest. Is like I want to be professional because I consider myself like luxury brand, not brand, but like luxury family and dog photography in a studio. Like I want to give you a great experience type of thing, but that doesn't, I still have fun with people and everything, but it's just like, how do you kind of balance that with somebody, like when you get on that call and you're doing those hours or whatever with them, and you're finding, hey, you're just a goofball and you're talking like you want, like if it was me, and it's like, but I want my voice to be this. It's like, well, why don't you want to interject some of your normalness
So
into your voice?
this is where I'm going to say, John, that you need to jump on your couch or your sofa, because the question that I ask almost everybody, and this is a really important point, and I've struggled with it myself because I used to be an attorney. What does professional mean to you?
Dum dum dum.
Right?
No,
Because like,
I get it.
can't you be professional and goofy? Like what does like, to me, professional, I think, means things like doing what you promised, showing up on time.
Yeah, well, and
So
it's like
that's
one of those
being
things,
an
like
expert in your
it's like a
field.
little thing and everything, and you see it in the photography world too. You have some photographers that I call it like hoity-toity type of photographers and stuff, and they dress like in suits. Like there's this one dude I follow, I love him to death, but he wears a kilt. That's just his thing,
Yeah.
but it's like a suity kilt, and so it's just like it's very formal. I mean,
Yes.
he's got the gold leaf, frames are all throughout his studio and all that stuff. And then you have the people that are like like more laid back and stuff. I feel like I'm more laid back, but I want to be not laid back when I present myself to a client. So like at one point I went out and bought like really nice sports jackets and clothes and stuff so that I would like present myself really nice in a studio, because I felt like that was the people that I wanted in my studio, but it's not necessarily what I'm always getting. And then the other
Yeah.
side of it, but on the flip side of that is just like, I like being casual. Like, I mean,
Yes.
you and I are just sitting here today. I mean, this is not, I don't have sessions today or anything, but I'm like in a fleece and I've got warm up pants on and stuff.
Right.
And
I'm in my Hanes sweatshirt, if you
yeah,
can't
right.
already
And
tell.
so, but I mean, I've done sessions where I wear shorts and a branded polo shirt, and I've
Yeah.
done sessions where I wear a button down shirt and I've tucked it in and worn a jacket, and I've done where I've done button down shirt, jeans, and untucked. You know,
Right. And
I feel more comfortable untucked than I do tucked. You know, and I feel like that's more my personality because that's what I wear when I go out around. You know,
yeah.
but it's just it's interesting you're saying this, because I feel like what we're just talking about has nothing to do with like brand verbiage, but it does at the same time.
It
You know what
does.
I'm
And so
saying?
this is, do you know, this is honestly why, like, I didn't, not that I'm here to advertise the business that Paige and I do, but it's honestly why Paige and I started the business that we do. We're going to try and create, well, we're creating like an email workflow templates for photographers, but they're split into different voice categories. And the reason is that Paige wanted to go and buy templates because she didn't want to spend a lot of money on it. She would go and get templates of like emails, and they were very like, hey bestie, like we're going to hang out and do this, and there was like funny jokes. And she's like, Jill, I don't know what to do with this, because by the time I strip out all the like voice that I don't like, all these sounds and these really casual tones, there's nothing left. There's no email left in the middle, and now I have to go and write it again from scratch. And then sometimes she would like find some, and they were like very formal, like absolutely, we request the pleasure of your, you know, like at this event. And she's like, this isn't me either. Like, what, how do I find where I am in the middle of this? And so like what we're creating is a way to split. I would almost call this how your like client interaction, like what level of formality do you interact with your clients on? And we've split it into 4 categories, and those overlap not completely with your voice, because you could be you're maybe not going to be formal and goofy, but you could be somewhere in the middle and goofy, or you could be somewhere in the middle and sweary, for example. So there's layers of your personality and voice that go beyond this. But at the very least, if you get the category that match the formality of how you speak to clients or the casualness, like you're probably starting from a position where it's going to be easier to use the templates than just, let's hope that the voice of the copywriter who wrote these templates happens to match the voice that I have.
Yeah. And I will say this about my emails. Like, I have trouble getting people to read them. And so, but I think that's part of like, you know, it's not voiced properly, and I know that, but I just don't know how to fix that. You know what I'm saying? It's just like um and I think there's a lot of people that would be listening to this are going, John, I'm just like you. Like, what do I do to fix this?
And honestly, that's how Paige felt as well. She's like, I have a blank screen. I don't know what to write. Let me go see if there's some templates somewhere.
Yeah. And like we go and buy templates, but they're not us. And then we try and make them us, and then it just gets sloppy, and then we're not good with words. It's like you mentioned something. I said I was a teacher, and you said you said English teacher. I'm like, I am not an English teacher. I was never an English teacher, but like my wife would, and my oldest daughter and my wife would both attest that, Dad, you can say things well, but you are terrible with writing it down. You know, it's like I can write it down, and somebody has to completely go in and edit.
But there's also the thing where the English teacher filter is a funny one, because sometimes it makes us feel like we have to write it more proper, so to speak. And actually that casual way of it, like being clear and casual, is probably what your audience want from you. They want to know relatively quickly what you're saying, and they want it to be like really clear what it is you're trying to get across to them, and they want you to sound like you. So don't spend like a paragraph kind of stiffly talking about something when actually all you need to do is tell them the time of the photo shoot. Just write the time of the photo shoot in bold with the address, and maybe put some more things in there. But it doesn't, sometimes less is more with this stuff.
Right. So with what you do, if take me through kind of like the process of like, if I was to hire you, and because this is, I think, something a lot of people don't know and they would want to know, like if I was to hire you to help and let's just keep it simple. Let's do the whole package, regardless of money, like the whole
Yeah.
package. I want you to do my website. I want you to do a brand voice. I want you to do a messaging guide, blah, blah. Cause give me the the diamond package, whatever that is.
They won the lottery and they're
I
ready
want
to
it.
spend
Yeah, I
all the
want it
money.
all. I want it all. But like, how long would it take for me to meet? Like, I know we would meet a few different times, but how long would it take for you to create that for us? Because I'm an impatient person, and it's just like
Yeah.
after we meet a couple of times, like, well, where's my stuff?
We're ready
You
to
know,
go.
it's like,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and a lot of that depends on how much is involved. So
right.
if I do a website project for someone, and a lot of the research that goes into one honestly goes into both. So there's more detailed research I'll do for messaging and voice, but there's probably like a 60-70% overlap in the questions that I'm going to ask. So we usually would meet for like at the beginning, and then I would also do some research behind the scenes. And then within a week or two, you would be getting a first draft of it. If we're doing the full messaging and voice as well, it's going to be more like 4 to 6 weeks because there's lots more things to document. Right. But for a website, I usually try and turn that around in like 2 weeks for the first draft. And then different copywriters deal with this different ways because there's always that terror of what if it doesn't sound like me? What if this is just something awful that they're providing? I'm sure photographers must feel like this with their clients in terms of like, what are the images going to look like? So some copywriters will offer a limited number of rounds of revisions, like 2 rounds of revisions. I usually say unlimited revisions within a time period. So I say, we'll focus on this for this week and we'll keep working at it until we get it right. But like, I can only keep it in my brain for a week. So you have to be engaged for that week as well. And we'll make sure we get it to the end. Because I'm also an editor and I edit for other copywriters, I actually just like to get you on the phone and or on the Zoom call and we bring it up on the page and I literally live edit as we talk and you say, I don't like that word. And we say, well, what about this word? And I look up the thesaurus and then we change it out. And we get like much closer if it's needing edits to what you need like on a phone call. Normally I don't need to do more than 2 rounds of revisions, but I feel like clients are more comfortable if you say, we will revise this until we get to the...
Yeah. I mean, that's the same thing in our photography business. Like we tell people, we want you to be happy with the photos. So,
right.
You know, we go through edit notes and all that stuff, but then we'll send them the edits. And I always tell people, like, you know, if we send you the photos and before we give you 5 days to review them, like the final edits before we send it to print, because I don't want you to have the bad, I don't want you to have stuff that you're like, oh, I wish you would have done this. Send it back to me. Like, and my take on that is the same thing as what I think your take is like, you're spending premium dollar with me. I want you to get a premium product at the end of the day. And
Absolutely.
and if you're a photographer out there listening to this, it's a lesson to know, you know, it's just like, you know, if you're charging $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for something and you're saying, nope, you get one edit and it's like, you don't like the edits and you're going to have to, you know, like, why are you nickeling and diming people? You're charging a premium.
And
would you rather have a happy customer and a client like, that's like wanting to come back or wanting to talk good about you? Or would you want to be like, man, every time I had an edit that they wanted to do, they charged me extra, you know?
Right. Because do you know, as a photographer, not necessarily you, John, you probably do, but other people who are listening, the cost of acquiring a new cold lead client. Like, think how much you spend in marketing on money and time, and then think about what if you get a bad Google review from that client. So now that's appearing for all new people to look at, versus that client who you went above and beyond for, coming back 6 months later for Christmas photos, another set, you know, or they have a newborn, or they recommend you to someone else. So what is the increase in time for you, just to make sure the client is satisfied? So that's why I put a boundary on it, which is, I say, a time period. It's like unlimited, but it has to be while my head's still in your project before I move on to someone else's project. But I will take as long as it needs to get it right for you in that time period, because I want you to be a happy customer.
No, I love that. I think that's and you're sharing the value that you've shared, that, like, you know, and I appreciate when people say I'm not cheap, you know. It's just like, okay, cool. Like, tell me why you're not cheap, you know, like, but I think you're explaining why that, you know, because time is money, you know. I mean,
and this is a very meta conversation. This is what you should be doing, photographers, in your messaging. You're almost definitely not the cheapest photographer in your area, so why not tell people why not, so that they pick you for the good reasons and not because you're the cheapest photographer either.
Right. So if you're doing my website stuff, like, because you had said earlier on in the podcast, I picked you up saying like why we would want to bold this word, we want to capitalize this word or whatever if it's on your website and all that stuff. When it's all finished, are you putting that in the website, or how are you doing that with a photographer so that I know, like, because if you give it to me, I'm like, do you
What
want
do
me to
I
make
do
this
now?
a big font, or do you want me to make this a small font, or is this just like, it's just like a paragraph, or, I mean, like how has that worked and communicated with whatever I would get from you?
Yeah. Well, so usually when someone's redoing their website, they often have a designer who's like creating their new website for them. And I would give them what's called a wireframe, which is visually how it's laid out. So I create my wireframes in a Google Doc, but they'll have heading size for some things. I use tables so that like it shows you there would be an image on the right hand side here. Here's the copy that's on the left. Because, like if you just wrote up on a Google Doc or a Word doc, like the writing would just go across the page and across the page, and that's not how it's going to look on your website. If I'm writing it for someone who's doing their own kind of DIY, their own, if they have a template that they're going to be using, they can show me where the spacing is so that I can try and make sure the amount of words that fit, that are going to go in that space, fit the area that they have to write in. And that's the kind of thing we can catch in edits as well. If you come back and say, this paragraph's great, but like I need to cut half of it because there's not enough room, then that's the kind of thing where I could like help cut it down, or say like maybe we should move this section to somewhere else because it's still important wording to add.
And then like when you're doing the website stuff of it, how much are you considering SEO in that and everything? And are you giving tags for that, like the H1, H2 and all that kind of stuff?
Yes.
I mean, if you're a listener and don't know what this is a whole different podcast,
This
but
is a very different podcast.
SEO tags are like when you go in your back end of your website and you see H1, H2, those are header tags and they
Yes.
need to be addressed accordingly. So I'm not going to go too deep into that right now because that's a whole, like, that's hours of conversation.
Yes.
But they're not just like, that's my great font size. It's an H1
Right.
tag. You
Well,
don't
and
want
so for the
H1 tags
longest,
like 10 times on your main website
I
because
have to tell you, John, when I didn't know about SEO, I much preferred how my H2 looked on my WordPress. So I just made everything H2. And then I
no,
learned about
I
it and
did
I
the
was
same
like,
thing. I was
oh
like,
my
hey,
God,
I like this font size of
this
H2.
font is
So I'll
much
just do
nicer.
H2. And then I learned it's
So,
like, no, H2 has to match your H1. And now your website's all confused.
the super like one sentence explanation I give people is that all those tags are to do with what Google sees in the algorithm when it's answering a search, and also sometimes what your audience sees on the Google search page when their search is answered. And it's not the same as the words they see when they go like and then open up your website necessarily. So yes, I do think about that. I'm not a like qualified SEO specialist, but I always think about tags. I will do like a limited amount of research on that to make sure we're covering the right keywords. If you have SEO research yourself, then I will absolutely bring that in the writing. Well, I did an SEO course this year, and what I really loved about it was that they're saying that with each of the new changes with SEO, and we won't get into detail about it, but each of the new changes are moving to more natural language of how we actually talk about something. So this is why messaging is key. If you've really thought about what you do and what you want to be known for, and you're using that in your language on your website, it is kind of the same as SEO. Now, when it comes to like H1s and H2s, we'll make sure it's worded very precisely because you don't have space to mess around with those. But in the bulk of the site, you will naturally be using the keywords that your audience are searching for if you've thought about your messaging.
No, that's a great answer. And if you didn't catch this, folks, like her being able to speak educatedly about what I just asked, I mean, that's really a big key because like if you are talking to somebody and they're wanting to do your website and they don't know what H1, H2, H3 and all that stuff are, they should not be doing your website. Because I've had that happen before because like they just say you're throwing crap against the wall and it's not doing anything for you. Websites have to be defined in a certain way for Google to recognize it as a legitimate website. So
and especially if you're using that funnel strategy, which is cold traffic. If you're doing ads with website, you need like cold people coming to your website, your SEO needs to be on point. It is less important, but still important if you're going with that warm audience strategy where people are only coming to your website because someone gave them the name of it.
Yeah.
But I would say you always want to be found if you can. If you can just change some of those words there and you get more people through your analytics, you want that to happen.
No, that's good stuff. So talk to us a little bit. I'm going to change gears a little bit. I know you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I talked about it at the beginning because you had told me about it and Paige had told me about it. So you guys are creating this package kind of deal that would be like emails and things like that it sounds like I can purchase, and it has different kind of voicings and stuff like that. Like, talk to me a little bit about what that looks like and how somebody could use that, and why would I do that versus, I mean, I think the obvious is it would be cheaper because it's templated and it's not personalized, but why would I want to do something like that versus hiring you to do all that voicing and stuff like that for me personally? And how do I discern, should I buy a package like this, or should I just bite the bullet and do it right the first time?
So the interesting thing here is that what we've been really talking about up until now is marketing. How do you find someone who might become your client, which is through website, social media copy, how you're talking in your brand, like on your sales calls, like that's all before someone became a client. But the thing that, and Paige and I are going to do some of that in our business flow and format, but a lot of it is about once someone has become a client, how do you give them the best client experience automated so that doesn't depend on you having a good week and having space to do it? How can you give them a great client experience with hardly any extra work for you? And like I said, really catch those low-hanging fruit. How can you make more money off the clients you already have? How can you encourage them to be more repeat clients? How can you get referrals from them more? So it's really about delivering the best client experience. And that comes from any emails when someone becomes a lead in however you do your client management. So if someone has got in touch with you and said they're interested, and therefore you start sending emails and text messages, because Paige uses those in her business as well. I know she learned about that from you, John.
And we had your podcast is kind of come on right after hers, so they're going to be back and back.
And I've heard all about it in like lots of detail because Paige and I are always talking about.
We've talked about texting a lot. So yeah,
and like text, this could work for just as well as emails. So like once you have someone in from a lead to booked, and then all the way from booked to the photo shoot, and then photo shoot all the way to like delivering images, asking them for testimonials, like every touch point someone has with your business once they become a one-to-one touch point, how can you make that the best experience you can so that you're getting really great reviews from them? And like I would also say the images that you produce as a photographer at the end, like let's hope they're going to love them. But if they've had a really bad experience before they get the images, which could be weeks or months if it's like a newborn or a wedding or something, if they've been having like odd emails from you, they don't really understand what's expected of them, last minute things coming in, then that's going to give them a bad taste in their mouth. Like it's probably going to affect how they view the images, even if they were really great images, because they're just going to have had a bad experience through the process. And so when Paige was trying to automate that part of her business, which she has done, and it's made a huge difference to how well her business functions and how much money she brings in. But what she noticed was trying to find templated versions of that was so hard, because the voice was the voice of the photographer she bought it from, or the voice of a copywriter who wrote it, who then also sometimes doesn't really know about the photography business. So she was just really struggling. And then she had a hodgepodge. Like some of her emails were incredibly formal, and sometimes they would be really casual at the beginning, and then randomly there would be a formal one which asked for a testimonial or something, because that came from the pack that she'd got from somebody else. So it gave that really variable experience for the client and what they were getting. So Paige has worked out really well like what she thinks you need to say in each of the emails in a workflow to make sure that you're giving your client all the expectations and the promises they need of like what you need from them and what they can get from you. So it'll include things like letting them know how long till they get their images, so they don't chase you like, am I going to see any images yet? Have you got any sneak peeks for me? Like by addressing that first, you don't have to respond to those kind of questions. And your client doesn't have to get mad because they haven't seen anything, because you've been really clear, this is when I'm going to send you an image or a sneak peek or something like that.
Right.
So Paige has thought about exactly from a photographer's point of view what all that needs to be, and then I'm creating 4 different versions of them depending on from formality to really casual, so that there'll be a quiz and you can identify which level of formality you are.
How are you addressing this? Because I know Paige, she's maternity and newborn type of photographer. I'm a dog photographer.
Yeah.
So like my communication, and we have different emails. Like if you come in as a dog person and we get a few newborns, we don't push it very hard, but every now and then we get people that want to do newborns with us or whatever, or toddlers or young kids or something, and they're not bringing a dog. So my conversation or my messaging and my voice or emails and stuff based on how to prepare for the session is very different. It's like, I'm not going to tell you how, bring this stuff for your dog. And then if it's a newborn, how are you guys addressing that when you're packaging this stuff together to fit different genres of photographers and what their messaging needs to be?
Yeah, well, so we're going to start with newborn and family because that's what Paige does and knows the best. And the whole point about this is we want to do things that we know. I'm not making this up as a copywriter and having a stab in the dark at what photographers might need. So we're going to start with sets that are to do with newborn and family. And then in time, we would love to, like if that's going well, we would love to dig in with someone who's a pet photographer, understand it, create your own set, and then use that as templates to sell. So we may be back in touch with you, John, at some point.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've already told you before we even got on here, and now that I've talked to you, it's just like, okay, I've got a goal for this new year to try and figure out like what it's going to look like to rebrand or actually not rebrand, but give my brand an actual voice.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I do quite well, but like, it's just, there is things like, and those are the things that are, I worked with a business coach once and he talked about the 1%. The people that are in the 1% are doing that 1% extra that nobody else is doing. That's taking them higher to the top and everything. And so I feel like this kind of stuff is the 1%. You said it earlier, and I would agree with this. It's like when you're first starting out, like this isn't where you start, in my opinion. This isn't like, if I'm trying to figure out like how to run a business and get clients in the door and all that stuff, I don't need to start with brand voice. I need to start with getting some money in the door. That's what I should start with, right? And you don't need this, but once again, my opinion, I'm not like trying to downplay what you do, but like as you grow in your business, you get to a point where it's just like, okay, now I've got to be the 1%. I've got to take my level to another level within this kind of thing, and I've got to define what that is. And I would argue, probably based on what you're saying, you would probably concur, the bigger your business becomes and the more you have, like Paige has, I know, staff, I have staff, and we all need to be on the same page of what that voice is, and that voice comes from me. It's just like what I tell them. It's not like a guide that's like, hey, so if I hired somebody today, I couldn't give them a voice guide and say, hey, this is our business.
And you would have to constantly personally be having that conversation as opposed to being able to hand over like examples of what the voice is supposed to sound like. So I think you're absolutely right about the 1%. If you do a little work on the front end, all this kind of brand messaging and voice becomes automated into your business at touch points you don't need to think about. If you haven't got your brand voice down, all these little niggly touch points will come up that you personally have to deal with. So someone will be annoyed with your studio manager because they said something and it's not really the way you talk about it. Or a social media post goes viral for the wrong reasons because it says something and it's not really the way that you want to represent your business. Those are all things like fires that you personally as the business owner have to take time away from making more money to deal with. But the converse of that is when your branding is on point, it's automatically doing all this stuff for you the right way so that it's like smoothing those things over so the fires don't come up.
Well, I'm excited because like I do intend, like we're going to have another conversation
after
the new year is over and the holiday dust settles and all that stuff. But like, I would love to do another podcast after we've gone through the process and talk through like, what were some of the pain points that you had with me? I'm not afraid to like be a guinea pig and just say, hey, like you and I work together. Like, what were some of the struggles, like from your perspective, that made it hard for you to do what you need to do, or but made it easy for you to do the things that you do? So I'm excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, because definitely, like you say, people don't always know what we do, and it feels like like it's hidden away. Like, I am all for opening that up and letting
Yeah,
people
yeah,
see what
yeah. No,
happens in the
it's great.
process.
It's great. So, as we finish out here, so you know, I know you're starting this brand messaging thing, or like the email stuff that you're working with Paige. Do you guys have a timeline of when you're like looking at getting that rolled out and stuff?
I mean, yes, but we're like, we both have our own businesses and families
Oh
and
no, I
kids
get
and
it.
other
I get it.
things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What we do, our goal is to have it have our first things released by the end of the year.
Okay.
So we're busy working. I'm deep in the templates right now and trying to like make the different voice versions. It will be up at flowandformat.com. So right now there's a holding page there. And we'll probably put something up there that if anyone's really interested, you can sign up for like an email list, just that when things get launched, we'll let you know. So if anyone's interested, go to that website. I don't know, John, that there'll be anything there now. Paige was desperately trying to fix it yesterday. But there will be some kind of holding page there. And when it goes live, that's where we will have a quiz to help, so that you don't need to do the work of figuring your voice out. We will ask you questions through a quiz and identify what your voice is.
Awesome. So with that being said, you know, I loved having you. This was so good. And Paige was right. She was just like, you got to have her on. She's so good. And I'm so glad that we did this. And I think people that are listening are going to get a lot out of this, because it's not something we talk enough about in business. And like, I preach this a lot. Your photography is your photography. Your experience is more important. You know, like if people have a bad experience with you, and your photography is you're the best photographer in the world, you're award winning, whatever. Nobody cares about that because they remember the experience. And we've had people. It's very rare. It's probably 0.5% of our clients that have had a bad experience with us for a variety of reasons. And because of that, we lost that client because they were just like, when I look at these pictures, I remember the bad experience and I don't want these pictures, and they could have been amazing pictures. Right. And now we strive to make good photos and do a great job with that too. And you should, but, as you've been saying throughout this podcast, it's like, the client experience is so important. If you go to my Google reviews, a lot of it is like about experience. It's not about like how pretty the photos were. It was like, we had a great experience. John was great. Trish was great. Kelly was great. Ricky was great. Like, and it's talking about all the different people that they came across and the things. So, I mean, without having a brand voice, I'm doing okay with that. But I think, like you're saying, it's that 1%, like we just talked about. It's just like taking it to another level where it's just like it becomes even more solidified within that. So real quick, one quick question: do you do blog work too, or is that?
I don't. I used to. I don't. Honestly, I charge too much for somebody to hire
No,
me to
I
do
figured that
work,
was
which means
that was
I
the case.
will.
So
I will, but you would have
what
to
would
pay
you
me a lot.
do? Like, what would some advice be for you then, for somebody that's wanting to, like, let's say I hire you and I have you write out this brand voice and stuff, but I'm not the best writer. I'm not good at that kind of stuff. Like, where would you recommend going from there and taking that information and putting into blog stuff?
So the best thing is, when I made a voice guide for Paige, she gives that voice guide to the person who sometimes writes her blog posts, because it not only does it say you're an upbeat person or you're a glass half full or whatever, it actually has specific linguistics. And I didn't get into the detail of this because this is probably going to be too much for your audience, but it talks about average sentence length, average number of exclamation points. Paige is not an exclamation point user. And you can tell if someone has written social media that it's not her, because it's littered in exclamation points. So it will talk about what punctuation do you use, where are your active verbs, what sentence length, what's the average grade level that you write to. Do you write to grade 6 or grade 9 or grade 3?
Oh, that's awesome.
Things like that. So it gives instructions to a writer who charges less than I do, so that they can go and write in your voice.
Then you could go and find somebody like on Upwork or something like that. Because I found somebody on Upwork before that it's just did awesome stuff for me. But I can see how giving her something like that would be like, oh yeah, that would make my life a lot easier, because now I can keep it consistent and all that stuff.
And often as part of a voice guide, I will create a very rough content plan for you. So it's not a content plan of detail, but it's like, here are the main pillars of themes you want to talk about, because they match your messaging. If you're going to say that you were like this, make sure there's a category of your social media and blog posts that talk about this. So we often break down a kind of approximate matrix of things you should be talking about. And I will always do strategy sessions if people would like them, where I can help break down a little bit more detail what they should be covering in blogs and social media and things.
That's awesome. So I know you got me thinking of some things that I need to focus on, and I would encourage people that are listening that are having the same thoughts as I'm having. You don't have to do it overnight. Plan accordingly, but now you have a resource.
Well, and I have this, I mentioned at the beginning, this worksheet. I don't know that I can just give you the address for it here, but it's like you just sign up for my newsletter and it gives you a
you send it to me and I'll put it in the show notes and all that stuff. And so people will have that. But where can people find you if they're looking to like reach out to you and find out more about what you do, and then maybe talk to you one-on-one and about what you can help them with their business?
Yeah, always happy to. So my name is Gillian with a G, just to start to really confuse things. So I'm kind of most active on social media on Instagram, and my handle there is Jill Hill Edits. If you like funny memes and puns and about misspellings, then come and follow me over there. And then my website is Jill Hill Writing Services, which is a terrible name, and I should really think about rebranding that into something else. But anyway, so Jill Hill Writing Services, where you'll see my offerings that are things like brand messaging guides and voice guides and things like that. But yeah, I'm always on Instagram, unfortunately. So if you ever want to ask a quick question, that's a great place to find me. I quite often do Ask Me Anything weeks, where I encourage people to message in and ask me questions. So
awesome. So we will put that in the show notes. So if you don't find that, or can't remember what she just said, then we'll put it in the show notes.
SEO is not good for me in that sense.
Yeah, just click on it and you'll be able to find her. But Jill, I thank you so much for coming on here and agreeing to do this, because it was really a pleasure. I mean, it literally, I think it was a week or two, Paige was like, you got to have her on. And I contacted you right away and you're like, absolutely, let's do it. And I'm so glad to have you on here and learn the things that we did, because I think it's very insightful. But appreciate your time. Appreciate you giving us time.
Oh, it's been great chatting, John. I love to geek out about this stuff, so anytime.
All right. Well, thanks, Jill. And we'll talk again soon after we do some stuff on my stuff.
Sounds good. Thanks, right. John.
Bye-bye.
Bye.